All right, welcome to Lecture 11 of Stanford CS193p, spring of 2025. Now, normally I try to kind of design the lecture so that at the end of the lecture I'm like at a normal stopping point, which we did great last time, but this time I guarantee you that's not going to happen. Okay, at the end of this lecture we're going to be halfway through doing something. We're just going to immediately continue on Wednesday, so don't be too freaked out about that. It's just unavoidable. It's just the things that I'm doing. The place where it's going to break is going to be right in the middle of something. And so what are we going to learn today? Well, we learned a lot last week about kind of how to make a little more complicated app that had multiple views, and we were navigating between the views and all that stuff. Is great. So today we're going to start out talking a little bit about cross-platform. Okay, how do we take what we've done and make it work on iPad, and then we're going to leverage that to make it work on the Mac as well. And then we're going to move on to adding even more views to our app. So we'll see how far we get today. But let's start off with this cross-platform business. This is where we left off last time. We had just finished adding this little cheat code in there. And I'm going to leave the cheat code in for a second here because I want to show you some other features related to it. But what I'd like to do is take this app and see what it looks like on an iPad. And first, let's just try it on the iPad and see what it looks like just as is. So I'm going to go up here to my simulator, and I'm going to switch over to simulating on an iPad. And since I've switched the simulator to that, it also switches the preview. Right there you see. And you can see on the iPad, basically it works, but I mean, this app looks not so great when it's gigantic like this. And a lot of students, when they're first doing their apps, they make it work on the iPhone and they say, oh, I can support the iPad, I'll just turn it on for iPad, and then they end up with gigantic mode. And gigantic mode there is not taking advantage of the greater real estate that we have on an iPad. So what could we do to our UI here to make it take the advantage of this space more? Well, one thing we could definitely do is put this view right here on screen at the same time as this one right here, side by side. And that turns out to be really super easy to do. We're just going to use a different little navigation thing than a navigation stack. And just as a reminder, a navigation stack is kind of like a stack of cards. That's why it's called navigation stack. And every time you do one of these navigation links right here, you push a card onto the stack. So if I am here in this view and I tap on this navigation link, I've just pushed a card on top, and then when I hit the back button right here, it takes the top card off. And I can have as many cards as I want. Again, the settings app, I'm sure you've seen you can go many layers deep where you're clicking down and down and down, so it's a perfectly fine way to do that. And there's a different kind of navigation thing called the NavigationSplitView. And as its name implies, it splits the screen into multiple pieces, and it can split it up to 3 different pieces. A lot of times you'll see only 2 of these pieces on there, but sometimes 3. Now, when I change navigation stacks and navigation split view, it almost just works just like that. But there is one error down here. It says missing argument for parameter detail in this call, and the navigation stack only had one argument, which is the root view of your navigation stack. The navigation split view has 3 view builders. One is the leftmost pane, one is the rightmost pane, and one of them is the one in the middle. And look at Xcode, it actually has this. Left, it's got this, and on the right, it's got this inspector over here, and in the middle, it's got its content. And this is usually what these 3 panes are about. On the left, we're choosing things we want to look at. It's showing that to us in the middle, or if we don't have this, then it's showing it to us on the right. And then the one on the right is usually like an inspector or some kind of ancillary thing that is helping us look at what we're seeing in the middle in more detail. That is usually the structure behind any split view in any app. And so the 3 arguments here to navigation split view are the root view builder. And then I'm going to have another argument here would be the content. That's another view builder. And then there is the detail, which is another view builder. Now, we only have 2 views our list and then our game. So I'm not going to have this content one. I'm just going to do the left and the right, which for us is going to be the main chooser, and then the detail is going to be our game. Now, what goes in here in this detail side? This is the right-hand side. I don't actually need to put my CodeBreaker view there, even though that's what's going to appear there. And the reason I don't need to put that there is because I already have this navigation link and this navigation destination. It's putting it up there for me. So for compatibility between NavigationStack and NavigationSplitView, this just works. So what would I put in here? Well, what I'm going to put in here is actually a text. I'm going to say, choose a game, because this is the thing that's there if there's no CodeBreaker view there. We haven't gone through one of these navigation links yet, so we don't have a CodeBreaker there. So I want to tell the user to go select a game over there, choose a game. And if you look at my preview right there, a little hard to see, make it a little bigger. There we go. You can see it saying choose a game right here. And see this little button up here? This brings out the leftmost pane. Now, this is nice. I do have both of my views on screen at the same time, but it's kind of useless because if I try to interact with this side, it just makes the other one go away. When I bring out this chooser, the other one's grayed out. It's not active. And if I choose one of these here, though, it is going to choose it. Watch. Whoop, there it is. But then I go to play it. Oh, dang, it goes off again. And I want to keep those things on screen at the same time. So how do I get my split view to keep both things on the screen at the same time? Of course, we just use a view modifier on split view. So I'm going down here to the bottom of my split view, and I'm doing .NavigationSplitView style, I think it's called. Yes. And one of the styles, there's different styles. Here's like double column, I think is one of them, or something like that. But we want the one which is balanced. Balance says balance the space between the two. Now, I put that on there. It didn't fix it. This thing is still not showing. But watch what happens when I bring it out. See, it's splitting the space between the two. And now if I click, I'm getting both. And sometimes you want your split view this way, and sometimes not. Generally, if you have maybe a lot of information like Xcode has, you want those things on the side off most of the time because you want all your space in the middle. But if you have something like our game, which is a very simple game, it doesn't really want to be in gigantic mode, it actually is happier to be this way. And so you get to choose. That's why there's that balance thing there. Now, one thing is that when I restart my app, which in the preview, of course, you know you can click on this button down here in the lower left and it'll restart the preview. It hides that list again and makes me go back and click this here. So what if I wanted my app to launch with the two panes already showing? Well, that's a different thing. That is an argument to the navigation split view. It's called column visibility. So you go here and you say column visibility. And the argument here is a binding to the column visibility, which is an enum. And that enum has things like both columns or the detail column only or whatever. And this column visibility, of course, needs to be an @ state, private var, column visibility. And AI didn't get that right there. The type of it is something like split view. There it is right there, navigation split view visibility. And oh, AI set it by default to all. And again, we have double column, detail only, and I want all, which means I want all the panes, all three if I had three, but I only have two, so it's all two. I want them all on screen at the same time. And in fact, this has worked. Look, if I restart this preview, it's showing them at all times. Now, the interesting thing about this column visibility is that I always want it to be an all as the programmer, but I still want to give the user the chance to hide it. Like maybe they're playing this game, they really love it, and they want it to be huge. They want to be able to hide it, but I always want it to be all. Now, the fact that I want it to be all is me communicating to SwiftUI, I want this to be all. And when the user clicks the button, the user is communicating back to me, I want it to be just the detail. So we're communicating through this binding. That's why it's a binding. But the interesting thing is, I don't really care what the user says. I'm happy to have the user do it, but I'm not doing anything about it. I don't have any code in my app that says if column visibility equals something, then do something. I don't really care what it is. And from my part, I always want it to be all, so I'm only communicating one thing, all. So this actually could be .constant dot all. This dot constant, hopefully you remember from binding, this is a binding to a navigation split view visibility. That's what that thing is, and because of type inference, we don't have to type this, but it's essentially a binding to the constant value all, and then I don't need to have this thing, which is right because I don't care what it is. Now, setting this to all, you might think, oh, that means it's always going to be all, but it's not, because this little binding is just for us to communicate. The user can still say, I don't want that there, and when it does that, the system is going to try to tell me through the binding that it's now only detail, except for that I'm not listening, because I set that thing to be all constant. So you can say it's detail only if you want, but I don't care. It's okay to make this be a constant if that's basically just I'm constantly wanting it to be all, but the user can choose what they want it to be. It's just nicer for us. We don't have to have that extra @state private var thing there. Now, I'm looking at my app here on the iPad, and I have fixed some things. I'm using the space a little bit better. However, I'm seeing some things I don't like. I don't like that on this game with only 3 pegs, that the chooser is really big. It just doesn't feel right to me that we have these gigantic blue chooser buttons at the bottom, and my game is kind of small. It's just the wrong balance between what's important in this view. So I want to make this smaller. And I'm doing this somewhat just to emphasize to you, I'm not going to make that smaller by saying dot frame height equals whatever. We know dot frame width and dot frame height are bad. I would challenge you to never use those the rest of this quarter in your final project or anything. We want our UIs to be expansive. But sometimes we do run across a place like this where, yeah, we want it to be expansive, but there's a limit to our ability to accept it, and that's when we use dot frame max height, which you saw me use before, or max width. In this case, it's max height that I want to limit. So I'm actually going to go back to my CodeBreaker view where my peg chooser is right here. I'm going to say dot frame max height, not height, max height. Let's try 100. Yeah, that actually looks okay. Maybe even as small as 80. I don't know, somewhere in there, 80 or 90, something like that. And of course, I'm going to make a constant for this and put it in a struct like we always do so that they're all gathered together. And then as I'm putting this out in user testing and I'm getting ready to ship it, I'm always looking at those constants to make sure that I need them, that I can't figure out a way to not have that constant there. Or if I do, that it's the constant I really want. That's why we separate all our constants out instead of having these blue numbers scattered all over our code where we just don't know all the assumptions we've made. That does make our app look a little better. But something else that would be fun here is some titles on top of these views, especially on top of here. You see I've got this earth tones, and I've got my earth tones game going right here. If I hid this, it'd be really nice if it said earth tones up here, just so I can remember what it was. And also over here, on top of this one, maybe at the top a title that's like CodeBreaker, or the name of my app or something would be a good grounding title here. So how do we put titles into our UI? And that's all about navigation, because just like with toolbars, the navigation system, whether it's NavigationSplitView or NavigationStack, is going to look at the view that it's showing and figure out what toolbar items. It's also going to look at the view it's showing and ask, what is your title? And use that title. And the magic we use for that is .NavigationTitle. So let's do them both. First we have this list. This list is the view that is showing in this pane right here, in this part of the navigation. So I'm going to say to this .NavigationTitle is CodeBreaker. And look, it put a nice title on there, CodeBreaker. And how about this title for the thing that's appearing over here? What is the view that's appearing here? It's our CodeBreaker view. This is our CodeBreaker view. So let's go down to our CodeBreaker view. Here it is right here. And I'm going to say .NavigationTitle, and it's the game's name. That's what I want to be the title there. And now if I click on here, oh, it says Mastermind, Earth Tones. You see. And by the way, I might want this. This is big title here. Maybe I want it up in the title bar instead of taking so much space here. No problem. Another .navigation thing we can do for that. Navigation title display mode .inline, which displays it inline along the top there. So that makes our app look a little better too. And there's other things we might be able to do with our layout. But I think we've done a pretty good job of transitioning here from the iPhone to the iPad. Yeah.
Are all these changes also now happening to iPhone version?
You know what? That's a really good question. Let's go back and look at the iPhone, make sure we didn't break something, because we changed this to Navigation Split View. Are we going to go back to our iPhone and it's going to be like really tiny slivers of apps in there? Oh, I hope not. Let's go check. Here we go, back to iPhone. It doesn't look like it's changed at all. It's changed some. I got the NavigationTitle up there. And what happens if I click on it? Oh, it did what it did before. It just navigated over there. And yes, of course, Apple has done a fantastic job of making so that if you do Navigation Split View, it'll still work on the iPhone exactly like you would expect. And this is really awesome because we don't have to have a lot of if iPad, do this, if iPhone, do this. And in fact, I'm not even going to show you how to do that if iPad, at least not this week or next week, maybe the week after, because I'm going to have some miscellaneous topics after next week. Maybe I'll show you that, but I'm not showing you now because generally we try to avoid even having to say that. In the same way we try to avoid frame width, we're trying to avoid having platform-specific things. Yeah.
So Navigation Split View is something that's defined really only in like iPad and not on iOS?
Does Navigation Split View only do what it does on iPad? And the answer is no. Navigation Split View is actually doing NavigationStack behavior on the iPhone. And you might ask, how does it know iPad to iPhone? And yes, of course, it knows the device it's on, but it actually doesn't make that decision about whether to go 2 wide or 1 wide and use the stack kind of thing based on the device. It actually does it based on something called the size class of the view that you're going. And the size class, there's horizontal size class, which is kind of the width, and there's the vertical size class. And there's only 2 size classes. There's compact, and so an iPhone is horizontally compact. The size class of an iPhone is horizontally compact. And in a horizontally compact situation, Navigation Split View knows that it can't do that thing. Okay? Interestingly, an iPhone in landscape on an iPhone Plus, a big one, is not compact. So it actually will do split view on a big iPhone turned landscape. But on a smaller iPhone, it will not. So on a smaller iPhone, it's also compact in landscape. So we kind of leave it up to Apple to decide where it thinks the boundaries are. But of course, when you test your app, you test it on every platform, and you might decide, oh, wow, that's just, I can't do a split view there. And then you're going to have to intervene. And like I said, I'm not going to show you how to do that today, but you can. And you can also intervene with the size class. Right? You can do things in your app, just like you can do it with dark mode and light mode, you can do it with compact mode and what's called regular mode, which is the non-compact mode. And you do that with @sign environment. You remember we did @sign environment color scheme to see the dark and light? Well, there's an @sign environment for the horizontal size class. You can find out what current environment is size class-wise. And yeah, we can flip this, by the way. If we go here and we go to orientation here, we can take a look at what our thing looks like. And so this is an iPhone, a regular iPhone, so you see it's not doing it. Maybe if we switch to an iPhone Plus or something, maybe this guy. When you first choose a new simulator, obviously it's got to fire it up, make it work, so it's working on it. Let's run it. And one thing that's cool, too, is when you're doing it in the simulator, you can do Command arrow to rotate. And look, this Plus, it did do a split view here, as advertised. And I can press a game, play my game here. And I might decide I don't want this because I can only see one guess. I might want it to be doing the other way, and I can do all that, but we're not going to do that today. And actually, I'll go back to iPad here because you can really see this more on the iPad. Look what happens when my app first runs right here. It says choose a game. That's a little annoying, okay, because I ran my app because I wanted to play a game. So I don't want the first thing I have to do to choose a game. So it would be cool if it would just automatically choose a game. In other words, I wish my app came up like this with a game pre-chosen for me to start. Here I'm choosing the first game, but maybe it chooses the last game I was playing. Because next week, you're going to make your games persist on disk. So when you launch again, it'll show you games that you've been in the past playing. So how do we do this, though? Because if you look at my list, this is my list right here. Where's the selection? There's nothing that tells me what's selected. The list is like managing what's selected as I click around here. It's managing it internally to itself. I can't see it. So how can I specify that I want the selection to be the first item or the last game I played or whatever? Well, turns out list will expose the selection to you, and the way you get the list to tell you what the selection is with the argument selection. And selection here takes, as you might imagine, a binding to the selection. So you will, of course, need an @state private var selection. And the real question is, what is the type of this var? And doesn't it kind of depend what's in your list? Right here, I've got a list of CodeBreaker games. It seems like I want this selection to be a CodeBreaker, right? I selected CodeBreaker. It seems like the selection should be a CodeBreaker. And the AI is saying question mark? Yes, also question mark, because nothing might be selected. That's what happens when my app first comes up. Nothing is selected. It has choose a game in there. And look, this just worked. I just typed this and it worked. So the answer is you can put any type you want in there as a selection. Now the question is, how does the list know how to set the selection? Or if you set the selection, how does it know which navigation link to link? And the answer is this. It looks at the values of the navigation link. And if that value for that navigation link is the same type as the selection, then when you click on the navigation link, it will set the selection to that value. And vice versa. If you set the selection to be a certain CodeBreaker, it will look at all the navigation links here and find one whose value is that game and automatically click it for you. Does this make sense? Now, it's interesting here, we have two different kinds of navigation links. We got the cheat codes and we got the games. So what happens if I choose a cheat code here? Because its value is not of type CodeBreaker question mark or CodeBreaker. So what happens there? Well, it's going to set it to nil, right? Because that value doesn't match. So when I click on this link right here and I say cheat, the selection, this internal selection var right here, is it going to be nil? Because I don't currently have one of the CodeBreakers selected. I have a cheat selected. You see? So it's a really nice system. They've made it really kind of simple and obvious what you do. You just set this type to whatever type of thing you want to select. So that's why I left the cheat in here, just so you could see that that's true. So let's take that cheat out of there now. We don't need our cheat. Get rid of both the link and also the destination we had for the cheat. So now we know how to select things. Oh no, I just broke my app. I'm trying to select a game, and now it's just saying choose a game all the time. It doesn't actually navigate. And that's just the way it is. If you intervene and say you want to be involved in the selection, it assumes you're going to manage the selection of what's in the detail. So we now have to look at the selection, and when something is selected, we have to update the right-hand side. And where do we update the right-hand side? Right here. Okay, right now we say choose a game, but we need to say if there's a selection, then put a CodeBreaker view here, otherwise choose a game. Everybody see what we have to do there? So let's do that. Let's say if we can let selection, in other words, if it's not nil, then I'm going to do CodeBreaker. In fact, I'm going to do this same thing that I was doing up here with that navigation destination thing, which is now broken because I'm managing the selection myself. So I'm going to take that out of here, put this down here, and the game I want to show is the selection. The selection is a CodeBreaker, and of course I want the selection's name as its title. And I'm just going to do this other thing, else. See what I had to do there? And that's because I decided I wanted to own the selection. I wanted to be involved in the selection. So let's see if that works. Woo, it does. Okay, I'm clicking, and it's switching to the different games. So I did a good job there, yeah. So the question is, what are the navigation links doing now? And this navigation link is still doing a very important thing, which is it's setting the selection. Because remember, I told you that the selection is set from these things' values. So every time you click on it, it's setting the selection. In second here, we're going to set the selection, and you're going to see it's going to click on that link for you. So the navigation links really matter. But what about this? What's this doing? Nothing. This is ignored now because, again, it's assuming you're doing this with the selection. So we actually would delete this right here, because we're doing that same code here in our detail with this if-let selection thing. Make sense? So that's good. But now that we have the selection, we could also select something. So let's get back to the original problem we were trying to solve, which when my app first runs, I want it to select something. So I wanted to select, let's say, the first game in the list. Like I said, I could be smarter and select the last game you played or whatever, but I'm going to select the first one. So here's where I load up these games, these little test games. So I'm going to say selection equals the game's first item. And look, it already worked. Look on the right, they recompiled and ran. If I go switch over here and I rerun it, whoop, back up to the top. And if I wanted this to be the last game, I could say last. Look what happens. Whoop, now it starts with the last. So I'm controlling the selection now, both on the input and obviously I'm having to respond to the selection. Yeah.
Does the selection initializer for list make sense outside of a NavigationStack or navigation?
The question is, does selection right here make sense if I'm not having navigation links inside of navigation? And the answer is yes, but you manage it a little differently. You don't have navigation links there, but there are other ways. Check the documentation for lists, and you'll see to tag each view in there, when you click on it, what selection it is. So you can do it. Most of the time inside a list, when we're doing selection, we're navigating, but not always. I mean, maybe have a checkbox list or something like that, possibly. Let's double check that we still haven't broken anything on iPhone. So I'm going to go back over here to iPhone. And look, when I run my iPhone, it's showing me the third one, the last, right? Because I still have this selection equals last, and it came up. This is how my iPhone came up, with this one selected. This is the third one. And again, if I change this to first and let my preview fire back up, now it's showing me the first one. So it is actually working on iPhone as well. I'm not sure I love this. On iPhone, I might want it to actually come to the list first, and we could control that again with if iPhone type of thing, but we're not going to. Yeah?
Can we change the game file first? You can install random and let the selection shuffle.
Can we do this being random? So I guess that would be what? Games sub int.random in 0 ... less than games.count. Does that seem right? Yeah, look at that. Random. Let's start it again. Oh, another random game. So it seems to be working. So you could do that. Yeah.
Why do we use let instead of var for selection?
Again, you're probably getting used to this. I mean, it's new to you. But if let selection means selection's an optional, please unwrap it. And as long as it's not nil, then this let selection is actually this var here. So this black selection here is actually different than this green selection up here. This green selection is our @state. This one is an unwrapped @state. Let's go look at this now on the Mac and see what we get for a Mac app out of this. And there's a couple of ways to do a Mac app. We could actually write a native Mac application. Now, a native Mac application uses a little bit different libraries than iOS does, because a native Mac app is not an iOS app. All right? But there's a really cool way to do a Mac app, which is to basically have an iOS app on the Mac. And it's essentially going to look a lot like an iPad. And this is how we turn that on. We're going to go back to our project settings here. And you can see that the destinations, right, under General, the destinations I have is a phone, the pad, or the Mac, and it's doing it as a Mac OS app. But we don't want that, so I'm actually going to minus that and take that off. And I'm going to do the plus. Could do Apple TV or Apple Vision here. But on the Mac, there's actually some choices here, and I'm going to choose this one here, Mac Designed for iPad. And what that says is, use your iOS code for iPad and make a Mac app out of it. Now, it's still going to be a Mac app. It's going to have menus, it's resizable windows, all that stuff. You can still do Mac things like add menu items to it or whatever, but it's based off your iPad version. Let's see what this thing looks like in this case. So I'm just going to go up here and pick Mac Designed for iPad here, and then I'm going to run it. And it's going to make me Giganto Mac right here. And this looks a lot like my iPad, right? I can select things here. There are some differences. For example, I can't swipe to delete. You see, I'm trying to swipe to delete. There's no such thing as swiping with your mouse. You don't swipe with a mouse, so there's no that. But what's interesting is, remember when we had edit mode and we could move these things around? On the Mac, you can do it without edit mode. Look at this. You just pick them up, move them around. So it's kind of flipped. On the iPad, you get swipe to delete, but you don't get pick up without edit mode. But on the Mac, you get pick up without edit mode, but you don't get swipe to delete. Now, we, of course, could still delete on the Mac by going edit and then clicking this minus and get delete that way. But I'm going to show you another way to do delete on the Mac, which I think is kind of fun, which is right-clicking. So on the Mac, you have a mouse, you have a right mouse button. And so you can right-click on something. And I'm going to make it so if I right-click on one of these things, it brings up a little tiny menu where I can delete. Right, so let's see what it looks like to do right-click and delete. Quite simple, actually. Let's make some more space here. We're back in our game chooser here. And it's this view right here, the navigation link itself, that I want to be able to right-click on to delete. So I'm going to say .context menu. That's the menu that appears when you right-click on the Mac. You can also get it on iOS by pressing and holding. If you press and hold, eventually this context menu will come up. And inside this context menu, you generally put buttons, and you really want the buttons that are in here to have a text name and also an image. And you'll see why when we look at it on iOS. So I'm going to make a button. It's delete. That's what it does. I'm going to use the system image here of -.circle. You'll see what that looks like in a second. And when you click this button, I just want to delete that game. I'm showing a navigation link for a certain game here. I want to delete this game when you click this button. So that is games.remove. And how am I going to say to remove that game? How about remove all games where the game equals this game? Now, remove all might be overkill because, of course, that game's only going to be in that list once. But this is kind of a simple way to do it. And I could use trailing closure notation here and not even do the where. Just say that, remove all. And this $0, remember, is just the argument to this closure. It's being executed for every single thing in the array, with the $0 being each item in the array, one by one. And any of them that are true, it's going to remove it. That's what this does. So let's see this working. Let's go back and run this on the Mac again. Okay, ready? Right-click and delete. Woo! But there's a problem here, though, that needs fixing, which is that I just deleted under C, and what's on the right side of my screen? Under C. So that's not good. So I'm going to have to put some code in when I delete something. If my selection is that, I got to set my selection back to nil. But let's also look at where's the minus circle. We can actually see that one over here. Now, on iOS, to get that context menu, I do press and hold, and look what happens. It comes up, delete, and there's my minus circle. So in iOS, these context menus always have the name and also a little icon. And if you don't have the icons, it looks kind of funny. It'll work. It'll just be blank on the right, but it's not good practice. And if I hit delete here, then it deletes it here as well. And the iPhone, not an issue about the selection because, of course, I can't be showing the selection at the same time I'm deleting it. But let's fix that. And actually, one other thing I want to fix that I don't like is this. Watch, I'm press and hold and delete. It just instantly deletes, no animation. I like animation. I want it to delete and then slide anything else into place to replace it. So let's put a with animation around this. And I'm kind of doing this just to remind you that, yeah, you made a pass on your apps in A4 or A3 to do animation, but you're not done yet. As you add new features, you got to think about, oh, do I want this to be animated? So you have to put with animation in there when you need to do that. One other thing I want to do while I'm sitting right here on this line of code is that deletion is destructive, especially since I don't have undo. So there is a way, when you have a button that does something destructive, to give the user a little bit of hint in the UI. And the way is to say roll.destructive. If you put roll.destructive on a button, it will usually show it in red. So the user says, oh, it stands out a little bit, this is destructive. And there are other roles like cancel, okay, it's a cancel button or whatever. And I am really a fan of putting these roles in there because they're there for a reason and they give a little bit of feedback. So now if I go over here and press and hold over here, see it's red? Red delete right there. And when I click this, watch the animation happen. You see how under C slid up right there? Definitely want that. And let's go make sure our Mac is doing something sensible. Okay, here we go. I'm going to right-click and delete. And it did do the animation, but notice that the right-click did not do red here. So the Mac doesn't do that. That's just not a thing on the Mac. So let's fix the thing where when we delete and we have something selected, it doesn't clear the selection over there. You could imagine doing that here, where I do games remove all and I see if the selection equals the game. But I'm going to do a more general solution to this. I'm going to go down here. I'm going to say on change of the games list, then if I have a selection basically, and if the games does not contain that selection, then I'm going to set the selection to nil. See how I've used on change here? I'm just watching the games list. I'm watching it, and if it changes, then I'm going to make sure my selection is still in there. And if it's not, I'm going to set it to nil. So this is better than putting it up here, in my opinion, because there might be other ways to delete things. Swipe to delete, for example, is another way to delete. This is going to work for that too. What did I type something wrong here? Oh, yes. So this error, it says unable to type check this expression. How many people are annoyed by that? Oh, 100%. Okay, me too. So 101%. What's actually happening here, that's the problem, is this line of code, selection equals nil. So can anyone tell me what's wrong with this line of code?
You declare the selection to be a local variable in that scope, and that's a let in that case. The real one you want to change is self-less.
Exactly. So the answer here is that this selection is this selection. It's a let, so I can't set it to nil. What I really want to do is set my self.selection to nil, right? I want to set this one up here. See how it turned green? That's my green one. Okay, anyone else see a problem that I introduced there? Ah, there we go. Contains. And, you know, decomposition would really be valuable here. We're starting to get a pretty big thing. And so decomposing this into little pieces, like especially if I decompose this into something like check selection or something, then I would have instantly gotten that when I compiled. I'm being fast and loose with decomposition here because we're trying to go fast, but you can see that it causes problems. So let's go back over here and do our iPad, hopefully. Yeah, there it is. Let's select this earth tones first. Got earth tones going, ready. Press and hold, and delete. Whoop, fixed our selection. So the next thing that I want to do here, let's do code cleanup first, because we talked all about that happening right here. Let's just do it. I'm actually going to make a big refactoring by taking this entire thing right here, this whole list, and putting it in its own helicopter view, which I'm going to call game list. Take my navigation title out. I'm going to leave that here. But I'm going to take all the rest of this, and I'm going to cut it out of here. I'm going to create a new helicopter view called game list. And of course, the game list still needs the selection because I'm managing the selection in terms of the navigation in here. So I need the selection is the one thing I need to share between my game list and the rest of the world here. So let's make a game list. Let's go here, File, New, Template. It is, of course, a SwiftUI view. Oh, careful. Let's put it in our UI place right there. It's called Game List. Create. And I'll just paste that huge list. When we paste this over, what needs to come with it? Well, definitely the games. Now, the games, it's interesting. I could keep the games over in the chooser and then pass it over to the list right here, or I could have it be in this game list itself. But I'm going to kind of semantically define this game list as the list of all games. And so I'm going to put it over here. But you know, I could switch back and forth. You could convince me either way. It kind of depends on how my app was being developed, whether I want to pass the array in or whether I want to keep it here. But I'm going to keep it here. So I'm going to go back to my chooser and take my games, which is data owned by me. Go back to my game list and put that here. So I'm going to own the games in here. And since I'm owning them, let's go back and this on up here where we put the sample games in here. Let's take that out of here, put that in our game list, and here, this here. And while we're doing all this stuff, let's refactor some stuff like this button. I told you we were going to do it. Let's do it. Let's take this out of here and call this delete button for game. We'll make a little func down here. It's a code breaker, and it's going to be some view. It's going to be a button, basically. And here it is. We could also take this right here, all this stuff, take that out of here, and we'll call that like add sample games. Down here, func add sample games. Paste that in there. I might even put this like this, a one-liner. Something like that. What else we got? Anything else going on here? Okay, a selection. We have to pass the selection in. It's a binding because we're sharing this selection with our game chooser, the one that's doing the navigation. So I'm going to do / mark. This is data shared with me, and is what? @ binding, var selection. It is a code breaker. Hopefully you're all feeling comfortable with @ bindings. By the way, I tend to like to put the things that are shared with me and that are passed into me above the things that are owned by me. I like the things that are owned by me closer to my code, and I like the things that are shared with me or passed into me closer to the callers. So is this game list compiling? No. We got our preview down here. Now I'm going to take the time to actually do a preview here for this guy because we're going to do some work inside this game list to make it more powerful. So let's do @state. Of course, we have to do @previewable. @state var selection, which is some code breaker. Don't have to set it to equal nil there. And then we can have our games list pass that $selection. I also probably could have done .constant nil here. Probably would have been fine as well. I'm also going to put this thing in a navigation stack because I already know that I have toolbars up here. You see up here? Got a toolbar with this edit button. So I want my preview to be in a navigation stack just so I can see it. And that's, again, perfectly fine to throw your preview in a navigation stack so you can see the toolbars that are on the thing that you're doing. And look, here it is. And you can see the edit in the upper right-hand corner. It's kind of small because of our iPad is so big. But you get the idea. Let's make sure we haven't broken anything by doing this game list thing. It looks like it all compiled, so that's good. Let's try it on the iPhone, for example. Here's our list. Now, when we click on things, nothing's happening in here because this is just the list. But it is showing us the selection, but it's not doing any navigation because this has no navigation. The navigation is over here in Game Chooser. And Game Chooser is using the game list, but it's the thing doing the navigation. So let's make sure this is working. This, whoa, what happened there? I'm only clicking once. Ready? Click. What the heck is happening here? Well, what's happening here is that, and look quickly in the list, look how many things are in the list. Whole bunch of things. Whoa, a big gigantic list. What's happening is over in our game list, in onAppear, right here, we add sample games, and it just keeps adding more and more of them, and it chooses a random selection each time. So that's what's happening there. I'm clicking on it on the iPhone, and it's going there to whatever I clicked on, but then the main view there went away, and when I go back, it reappears. So on the iPhone, that main thing in the navigation stack gets an onAppear when it reappears. Now, it didn't get reconstructed. Its var body didn't necessarily get rebuilt, although it probably did because we have a selection. But anyway, it's more that it reappeared. It came on screen. Now, that does not happen on the iPad. So if we go back to iPad, sorry, we have to go to Game Chooser. We don't have this problem where it's calling add sample games all the time because that list on the left is always visible. The game list never gets more than one onAppear. It appears, and then it just stays there while we're clicking around. But look at that. See, I hit it and brought it back, it reappeared. It added the sample games again. It keeps adding those sample games over and over, and choosing a random thing too, by the way. See that? So how do we fix that? Real simple. I'm just going to go over here in my add sample games and only do this if the games is empty. Right? So if the game is empty, then I will add those sample games, otherwise I'm not going to. And so now, over here in our chooser, even if we go away and bring it back, yes, onAppear is happening, and onAppear is calling that add sample games, but since the games aren't empty at that point, it's not adding more. So far, we can only look at our sample games, and it's doing a great job of showing the sample games to us, but we want to be able to add games now. And while we're doing this, I'm going to go back to Game Chooser here, and I'm going to pin the Game Chooser so that we can see it while we're working on the game list. What kind of UI would be good for adding a game? And you're going to have to do this in your assignment 4. One of the required tasks is to be able to add a new game to your thing. And a simple way to do it that you see in a lot of apps is we're just going to put a little plus sign up here in the toolbar. And when we press the plus sign, it's going to add a game. So let's just start with that simple thing, because we already actually know how to do that. And here's my toolbar. It currently only has this edit button right here. I'm going to add another button, which is button, and add game, sure. And of course, it's in a toolbar, so we better put a system image there. And I think I chose plus, which is the universal system image for adding something. And when we click this thing, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to create a new game. So I'm going to let new game equal CodeBreaker, name, untitled, I guess. We haven't given it a name really. And the peg choices, let's just pick, I don't know, .red and .blue or something. I just want to pick something that you recognize. And then I'm going to append it to my games. Games, append the new game. Right? Does everyone agree that this should add a new game to our list? A simple game called Untitled with red and blue pegs. Let's try it. Ready? Plus. Oh, it did it. Nice. Plus again. Woo! Very nice. Now, I don't like the jerkiness of it, so of course I'm going back to with animation. Do this, please. Okay, we'll let it rebuild here, and plus. Oh, that's better. A little softer, fades in. It's great. But of course, this is completely useless because it can only add this one kind of game, and we want it to add a game that we can choose the pegs and choose the name, so it's not called Untitled. This is a fundamental thing we want to be able to do here. And how are we going to do that? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to spend the next, probably the rest of this lecture, building a new view, which I'm going to call Game Editor. And a game editor is going to take a game and let you edit the number of pegs and edit the name of it. And then what we're going to do in add is maybe still create a game here, this default game, but then we're going to call the game editor on it immediately. So this game editor is actually going to have to put up some UI on the screen. And that's the main thing we're here to learn about, is how to put up UI that asks the user some extra questions. It'll be our third big view. We got two big views up there right now, the game list and the CodeBreaker view. And we're going to have a third one, which is our game editor, which we're going to put up. I'm going to stop my iPad and Mac versions from running. I'm going to go File, New, and down here to Template. It's a SwiftUI view. It's called Game Editor. Make sure it's in UI, which it is. There it is, Game Editor. Now, this Game Editor, you're going to give it a game, and it's going to edit it. So let game be a CodeBreaker. And then inside our body, we're going to edit this thing. And I'm going to go ahead and do a good preview here, too. You know, in the past, I've kind of skimped on previews and not doing them, but I'm doing them more here because I actually think it's really good practice. When you do a new view, put a preview down there. And then as you're working, you can see what it's doing, right? If you don't put a preview down there, then you can't do that. So what do we need in a preview here? Well, let's create a game, I guess, that it can be editing. So we'll select game equals CodeBreaker. And maybe I'll call this one Preview. It's like, because it's a previewing game. And the peg choices here, I'll pick some different colors. How about orange and purple or something? Just so we can tell it's different. Then this game editor, I'm going to pass this game in. This is the game it's going to edit. And then a cool thing to put in your preview sometimes is a little on change of. So I'm going to say on change of the game's name, print out game name changed to the game's name. And I'll do the same thing actually with the peg choices here. Dot on change of the game's peg choices. Print game pegs changed to game.peg choices. And the cool thing about this is, as you're working on your editor, because your editor is actually going to edit the game in real time, you can be looking in the console and it's going to show you all the changes that you're making, which is just kind of a fun way to track it as it's going on. And here's our game editor over here. Currently, you can see it just says hello world. Really what I want it to do for sure I'm going to have to be able to edit the name. So let's say, show me the game's name. And what is it saying here? This is saying plus, plus, plus. Scroll around. Actually, let's go back to the iPhone. So I have to zoom around. They're saying preview. And why is it saying preview here? Because that's the name of the game in our preview. But we don't want the name centered in the middle of the view like this. We want it kind of like it looks in settings. So we want it at least in a list or something, right? Because we're going to have the name here, and then we're going to have all the peg choices right after it. But this is exactly where we use another super powerful instruction manual view called form. So form, just like list, is a combination of VStack and dividers and scroll view, and it manages selection and all that. Form, similar, it's almost like a combination of list and a bunch of formatting stuff. It's what you use when you want a form, where do you want to collect a bunch of information from the user. If you look in the Settings app in iOS, it's got forms on every screen, because it's arranging stuff exactly like you see there. It's put a little white box around it. It's put the word preview in there. This is much more clear to the user. Oh, this is where I go to change the name of my CodeBreaker game. But unfortunately, if I try to change it here, I'm tapping on it. I can't edit it. And that's because it's a text. Text is fundamentally read-only text. But there's another view, of course, which is read-write text. It's called a text field. Now, the text field has kind of interesting arguments. The first argument is actually just a label for the text field, and I'll show you where that name thing appears in a second. But the second argument, which has the prefix text, is a binding to the string you want to edit. And here I've said $game.name. Now, this should work, right? I mean, game is an observable. And I told you that you are allowed to create bindings to the vars of an observable. And name is just a var of an observable. And we know that observables, they're reference types, they don't need @sign bindings. You only need @sign bindings for structs. So why is this not working? Why does it say cannot bind $game in scope? Well, the answer for this is quite interesting, and you're just going to have to deal with it, which is that you have to put @sign bindable var. Basically, Apple has either decided or has been forced to make it so that if you have an @sign observable and you want to create a binding to its variables, you have to mark it as @sign bindable. And @sign bindable basically just means you have permission to do this. It's not @sign binding. @sign binding does a whole bunch of stuff to bind two variables together in different views and all that. This is not doing any of that. This is just saying it's okay to say $. So if you ever get that thing where you're trying to bind into one of your observables and it says, I don't know what $game is, it's because you have to say @sign bindable. Okay? Question about that? I'd tell you what this name is right here. You see this name? Watch this. If I double click, now I can type in here. Hello, okay? Whatever name I wanted to think. But if I backspace all the way, though, look what it says. Name. It's like a little ghost placeholder suggesting what it is. So that little ghost is this word right here. And the idea is if the person backspaces all the way, it tells them what they're actually typing. And this is, we're typing our name, so, hello or whatever. Now, also notice that I am typing here on my keyboard on my Mac, and it's typing in here. That's not the way it's going to be for your users. And I'll show you what this is going to look like. Oh, I can't do it because it's a preview. All right, we'll see this in a second when we run this on the simulator. But what your users are going to see here is a keyboard comes up from the bottom. And one thing that's awesome about Form is it will keep the thing you're typing on the screen. In other words, the keyboard will not come up from the bottom and cover up where the person's typing. So it'll automatically scroll it up above the keyboard. So that's a really important reason to use a form if you have text fields where people can type things in. So we've got our name. We're collecting our name. We've bound it into the game's name. So that's awesome. Now we need to have the peg choices. Now I'm going to do my peg choices using a list of things called color pickers. So color picker is built in to SwiftUI. It's just a little round dot that when you click on it, it brings up a color picker that lets you pick colors by name or from a rainbow and all kinds of things. So let's see this. It's going to be a list. I'm going to do a for each over all of my game's peg choices. And I'm going to do our standard thing of using the indices, because I'm not 100% guaranteed that my peg choices are unique at this point, especially while I'm editing them here. And so I'm going to do id \self for the indices, and this is, of course, the index in. Now, for each of these peg choices, I'm going to show a color picker. Color picker. And color picker's arguments, the first one is the color you selected. And this is a binding to a color. And this is the one you selected from the color picker. So $game.pegChoices sub index. And so not only can we use $sign to bind into vars inside an AppSign observable, we can bind into subscripted vars, into specific index vars. So we can bind all the way down in there. Binding is very powerful. And that's true for if you add an @sign binding to a struct as well. You can do this same binding down through vars. So that's our selection. The other argument it has is supports opacity, which I'm going to say false. Now, this doesn't work. It's because early on, you actually very nicely and correctly said, this peg choices, we don't ever change that, so that can be a let, right? But it's actually good that you did it because it shows that if you're going to bind into your model, it has to bind to something that's a var. So this can't be a let. Let means we set the peg choices at the creation of our model and we never touch it. So var means, oh, we can go back and edit it. So we need that if we want to bind into that thing. Just like text field has a name right here, so does color picker. And you just put that as a view builder afterwards. So what is this? It's like our peg choice number 1 or whatever. So I'm just going to say peg choice, and let's say index +1, because I don't think peg choice 0 and peg choice 1 is very good for the end customer. Customers don't tend to think of arrays starting at 0 and all that stuff. They just think, oh, my first peg choice and my second peg choice. And look what we got over there. Zoom in a little. See it better? The form has put this in with nice little dividers in there. And we've got this peg choice, which is the label here. And we've got this right here, who has its label behind the scenes right there. And if we click on these little color pickers, click, it brings up this nice color picker. And we can pick things from a spectrum or using RGB here, or just pick some common colors or whatever, and see how it's changing the color right there. And we'll look down in our preview out here. It should be telling us, oh, it's not working. Look, I'm changing this. Hello. Why is it not putting something out onto the console here? That was the whole point. That's why I put that on changed there, so that as I was changing the game, editing it, I could see it. Well, the reason this is not working is because if you want that kind of interaction to be happening, this needs to be @sign previewable. And we saw that you needed @sign previewable when it was @sign state. Well, you need it if it's an @sign observable as well. So now if I do this and go up here and change it, so let's change this word right here to be hello. Look, even as I type the characters, it is showing me. Or if I go here and pick a different color, like red, then you see it's showing me the pegs change there. And that's showing us an RGB space or whatever up there. Now, the form, just like list, has sections, so we could have a section here. Maybe we'd call this our name section. And then we can have another section here. Maybe this section is our pegs. And yes, those can be views just like they are in list. And this guy, you know, maybe having these things be named is not really that valuable because it's kind of clear, but I'm going to leave it in there just so that you have a reference, because maybe in your app that you're doing, you might want to have named sections of your settings or whatever, so I'll leave that in there, but maybe not necessary here. It's kind of obvious that the peg section is pegs, etc. We're going to pause right here. We got 3 minutes left, but I said we're going to be in the middle of something. and we are, but this is probably a good stopping spot right here. So let me tell you what we're going to do next. I'm going to take this whole thing right here and make it be a helicopter view, which I'm going to call my peg choices chooser, because that's what it is, right? This whole group right here, this whole list, is for me choosing my peg choices. But I need more than what I have here because I need to be able to add more pegs, and I also probably want to be able to delete pegs too. And then we will move on to showing how to put this editor that we're building right here up on screen so we edit that new game that we put in. Right, so that's going to be the next steps that we do. Now, since I didn't really get to doing that, let me think about that and what that means for your A4, because in A4 you really kind of need to do that. You're going to have to put up, for you, you're not doing editing of a game, but you're doing settings, right? So this would be this equivalent of your settings, and you would want to be able to put that up on screen, and I haven't showed you that. So on Ed Discussion, I'll decide what to do about that, but we'll deal with that. But anyway, that's what you have to do for A4 eventually. So I'll do that on Wednesday. And then once we have that infrastructure for putting this thing up and doing that, then we can also be able to edit existing games. If we have an existing game that's like, I want to add another earth tone to my earth tone things, I can do it because I have a game editor that I can just bring up and edit. Okay, so that's where we're headed on Wednesday. And hopefully I'll get done on Wednesday with some time left over, and then I can do the slides that I want to do for next week's topic, which is Swift data, okay, the database, storing your stuff in a database. If not, I'll do the slides at the beginning of Monday, and we'll just be a little more rushed on next Monday and Wednesday. But that's where we're headed.